going to have a little discussion up here about a little experiment that the Institute for Contemporary Uranian Psychoanalysis has been operating since last August. And I'm about to speak up because we've got the stupid heater on tonight. It's better to have the heater on than to have the temperature in here that we had outside. You may have recalled it coming in. How it felt. Those from more northern climes or more easterly locales may not, have such a dramatic notice of how it felt coming, and then being in here with the heater. Well, I'll put up with it. So that'll be a little loud. A little hint to all you too, right? So I thought to perhaps get us a little more oriented, I might read you the little description that we have written up for this evening, to write a little context, and to put on my glasses to read it. Since Dustin has so very kindly read the title a couple times, so we have the idea that we're going to go over this process that we've instituted from the Institute of a advanced training program in contemporary Uranian psychoanalysis. We have found certainly the club, operating the Uranian Psychoanalytic Club here, Uranian psychoanalysis is a version of gay-centered inner work. And what is meant by gay-centered inner work is really a political term. It has to do with the activist becoming interested in working in the subjective political world versus the objective political world. That's not to deny the validity of the objective political world. By objective political world, I mean the political world we're familiar with, Republicans and Democrats here in America, let's say Republicans and Democrats, voting and so on and so forth, putting up positions and so on and all that. By subjective political world, I mean that what exists within any human subject's experience also is political. It may not seem that way versus what seems like the outer way things are structured in human societies. In an obvious sense of it, we're political, but it's certainly the case. And that's the way that the whole issue of, let's call it inner work, or working with, in relationship, subject to subject, to oneself and then vis-a-vis each other, is not, in this political sense, it's not so much interested in it in the form that we're maybe more familiar with inner work as psychotherapy, but that's a branch of teaching people about aspects or forms or whatever the therapist theory is of this kind of business, helps the client or the patient or whatever they're being called to learn a format or form or aspect of inner work or working with aspects of subjectivity vis-a-vis issues of subjectivity. That's certainly the most familiar way that that's understood today. But I myself, as I've shared many times, so hold to the idea that a psychological understanding should only be obtainable by therapists, or those who are going to become therapists, or those who are going to receive the attentions of a licensed therapist in a licensed format. But rather, I consider, in its origin, psychoanalysis had a political aspect to it, of the type I'm naming here. And in my opinion, honoring that is where the action really is in what might be considered further reaches of homosexual liberation. That's where the politics comes in. And I'm coming at it from a political angle, not as a therapist or professional in that sense of the word, or that the reason to learn this stuff is to be a better, quote, professional, unquote, that is to better be able to do this, say, for example, with a client, for example, in a therapy session. That's not the intent of any of this business whatsoever. That's actually that whole viewpoint on these matters, in my opinion, is an attempt, a political attempt, if you will, an extrovert political attempt, to confine and control this more authentic political aspect of psychoanalysis, which has always been a concern of the state and those who are rich and powerful who control the state, mechanisms of the state and the church and so on, who have vested interest in people not waking up, so to speak, to this otherwise very hidden realm of politics. How is it that you really do require, even if societies are hierarchically organized so that only a few reap the maximum reward, it would not be so, could not be so without the cooperation of the oppressed majority. How is that achieved? We might understand that better in earlier forms of human social organization, where you might have like a king or something, and there's obvious domination, and be power through terror, power through sheer force, physical force, I mean, and the means of organizing that. That's gone through so many permutations, for those of you who know history, world history, in so many forms. Still is very predominant in many places, but certainly folks around here have had several centuries, for example, here, and this kind of mentality of not wanting to put up with that kind of stuff, that kind of level. We'll certainly put up with our versions of folly, but not that, at least not overtly anymore. Lots of folks do in the world today. That's not to say that folks couldn't regress further here, in the situation we have right now. Everything is so to speak fluid or plastic in the sense of what might be thought of as reality. What most people take for what's called reality, what's like reality. And there's no sense that a lot, if not the majority, of what is actually experienced throughout all of human history, in time and place, by reality as a construction of subjectivity. It's often not seen because folks are usually in collusion with each other around how they're doing that, and that's a hallmark of doing that in that way, that it's invisible to participants. It's assigned that way, it's set up that way, it's set up to remain that way, and that's the kind of asleepness that I'm referring to. It's a political asleepness, but it's not really asleepness in the outer world. So I'm talking about that kind of asleepness. In a political sense. It's, of course, not being aware of what's going on in the inner politics, an inner sense of waking up politically, so to speak. That's not, it sounds like it's the same thing as waking up to the outer world in that sense, but it's not so. Because anyone who's actually had to do it, to find out about that. And that's what we're here to explore, how to have a training program around that. We're really focusing on that. Consistent and focused format of a small group of willing individuals. And it's been an experiment that we've been operating on for several months. So my apologies for going on for a few minutes to give you a bit of the framework. Oh no, and I was going to read this. So I'm already beginning to explain the little description, but I'm going to go ahead and read it anyway. Since the Institute for Contemporary Uranian Psychoanalysis inaugurated the world's first gay-centered psychoanalytic training program this past August, as a necessary extension and deepening of gay liberation activism, 4 months of fascinating and challenging operation have come to pass in regard to fathomful recreation of ancient homosexual initiatory fellowship, a richly fruitful period of growth and development for facilitators as well as trainees. In tonight's talk, the chief members of the ICUP Advanced Training Operations Committee, Kilbourne, Kaufman and Doug Sadownick, moderated by longtime gay psychological activist Mitch Walker, will share some of their experiences in implementing this radically fresh valuation of homosexual political development in the subjective and intersubjective domains. My apologies, I didn't extend my discussion to the intersubjective domain, but that's what the training program does. And will assess how it all seems to be going as the program for advanced training in contemporary Uranian psychoanalysis groundbreakingly moves into 2012 and beyond. That's the little description. The word groundbreakingly is quite intentional, by the way, at that point. This is not merely a gay psychoanalysis. What does that mean? Or it's not merely in the sense of, oh, it's a conduct of some kind of psychoanalysis that happens to be by folks who happen to be gay. Then we call a gay rabbi or a gay priest or a gay doctor, the way those kinds of people usually handle those kind of labels. The way that someone is a doctor is usually not somehow connected to the way they might be homosexual or heterosexual as they think of it. No, in my opinion, that's not so. And in fact, what might be called sexual orientation politics, I find permutates all of what's considered either outer politics or inner politics, how people relate, how they evaluate stuff, how they think or don't think, how they feel or don't feel about things. I find it's very intimately related to these matters of what I might call the commands or standards of judgment according to sexual orientation values, values that are ordered according to sexual orientation interests, especially by the majority. Will often get very picky about their attitude about their sexual orientation and what they don't do about that, how that permeates how they think and function without any seeming, for the most part that I can tell, any awareness of that whatsoever. So they say a strong difference right away with the homosexual folks. This program we're going to get into as an example of that. We're kind of aware of these things in a way that straight folks just seem often so oblivious. We're aware of this process with them. It's what I'm calling sexual orientation politics, both outwardly and inwardly. I noticed it when I went to the Jung Institute. Each tried to be there 3 times to get my CE hours, in-person hours. I did 9 hours, so I went 3 times to get my times there. And the place was drenched. The ideology, the way they talked, the way they stood, the way they handled themselves, the topics they shared, what they didn't talk about, all seemed to me deeply, deeply in accordance with their sexual orientation, not any other politics, the sexual orientation politics. In the most interesting way, but completely oblivious to them as they went about it, completely oblivious to them. So those who view that, for example, a non-sexual conforming attitude as being of interest because it's free, it's coming from outside, that kind of thing, doesn't appreciate such a critique. Saying that we come out of because we're not part of that way of looking at sexuality and how it informs with the way we understand that stuff, that therefore that's where we come from. Or that's why we have this unusual attitude. I would turn that on its head. I say that we cause to be different than the majority, not merely that we are. Not merely that because we are different, that gives us this different attitude. We were caused to have be different, to have that different viewpoint. That's not been taken into account by these usual critiques of what we may call heterosexism or the dominant viewpoint, or what it is that another counterposition is doing when it's critiquing dominant sexuality or going for its own values, separate from critiquing whatever it's critiquing. Its own existence itself beyond as a critique. I'm going to get into these qualities that the critiquers, at least the postmodern schools, often call essentialisms of various kinds, various levels of essentialisms. We go over various aspects of how that might or might not be relevant as we go through the presentations tonight of what the facilitators have been experiencing about trying to apply this program to trainees for the past 4 months. Since September, in a rather intense format, because we decided that our original format of the training program, which was to have this seminar format, the 5 trainees instead of 5, which was a large number, it turned out, format, we were going to have 2 3-hour sessions per month, and 2 separate tracks of activity with a common theme, learning to deal with women's process, more and more gay-centered inner work sense, and being serious about that, how that works with oneself and between oneself and others that are present in the seminar. How to do that. We have 2 3-hour sessions per month, but we realized before we started up that was not going to be enough. So in September, on top of those sessions, we added adjunct activities for each of these 2 major, we call them modules, Module A, which meets on Fridays, and Module B on Sundays. So we have them going every week. That each of these modules, which have the same purpose, divided additional activity to kind of where you could also be working on this material in addition to being in the seminar itself. In Module A, it's to be able to present what you're learning about or how you're struggling with your stuff at some particular time. Here in the club events, it's on a quarterly basis, and we rotate through the members of the exercise their adjunct activity, gives them another opportunity, a different kind of venue to be struggling around this thing, how to learn the process, how to view this process than they would have if they were just in a seminar itself.